Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining to the latest one of our Morecambe Bay sunset series. We started them when these genuinely did coincide with sunset back in the autumn. We kept going all the way through the winter, through a lockdown winter, keeping everyone engaged and connected and inspired by Morecambe Bay. And just before the call, I got in at about 25 to 7 from a walk, and just the last bits of sunset at that time. So we're going to carry on going with these into the spring when they will coincide again with sunset. So it's really lovely to have gone on that full journey with you all through lockdown. I'll just say a little bit of introduction about them. I'm aware that we get really large numbers on these talks. And there will be a lot of you there who are familiar with us all and who are old friends returning, but there will also be a lot of new people too. Morecambe Bay Partnership, the team deliver a lot of engagement activities, a lot of events throughout the year, usually on all our various funded programs across natural heritage and archaeology, sort of community work, access and recreation, history, oral history, some kind of work on local economy as well. And working with local people, working with volunteers, local communities is a core part of what we do. But obviously with the lockdown restrictions and COVID, it's been very difficult for us to do a lot of our traditional activities, which are, they are very hands-on, they are very people-y. So this has been a way really of keeping in touch with you all, keeping an events program going so that you still feel connected with the work that goes on at Morecambe Bay Partnership, and also that we feel connected with you, really, as importantly. And I think, as we've said many times, Morecambe Bay Partnership, we have a fantastic staff team. We have Susanna, the Chief Executive, here tonight. We have Amy, who's giving the talk, the Nature and Wildlife Officer, and we have the Archaeology and Heritage as well, Officer Claire. We have a great staff team, but ultimately Morecambe Bay Partnership is more than just the staff. It is all of those of you who volunteer with the partnership, all those of you who support us, come on our events and activities, and live and work around the bay, or as we discover, people who've moved away but still love the area and want to feel connected. Morecambe Bay Partnership is all of us, and these events, these talks have been a great way, I think, of us all keeping in touch, to learn about the bay, to celebrate what's special about it, and sometimes to find out some very practical ways of actually getting involved with the activities, even through lockdown. I will do a little bit of a trailer for forthcoming events at the end when we've heard from Amy, but I will introduce Amy and then hand over to her. So Amy, as I said, is our Nature and Wildlife Officer. She's still relatively new at Morecambe Bay Partnership, but is this your third or fourth talk you've already done with us?
Fourth,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. You're certainly a very engaging and inspiring speaker, so it's great that you've agreed to do another one, and really well timed. I think we've certainly done some sessions on sort of waders of the bay and wintering birds, and actually as we move into spring and we all see the bird activity really ramping up, and we see our winter visitors thinking about going off further north to breed, and as we see some of the breeding birds that are resident here just starting to think about it, and some of the other ones on their way here, it's a great time, I think, to be finding out more about our breeding birds of the bay. So thank you very much, Amy. And I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello and welcome to my talk called Life on the Edge, which is all about the shore nesting birds of Morecambe Bay and the Duddon Estuary. So as Tom, I shouldn't have even put this slide in because Tom's just so brilliantly introduced Morecambe Bay Partnership. So as Tom was saying, as Nature and Wildlife Officer, I'm responsible for the projects that are managing the sort of the birdie side of things, the projects that seek to conserve and protect the incredible bird life that we have here in Morecambe Bay. So if you've come along to some of our previous talks, as I know some of you have, you will have known that they've mostly been concerning the thousands of birds, about 250,000 birds that come and spend the winter on our shores, mainly waders and wildfowl. And you'll know that a big part of my role as Nature and Wildlife Officer is to not only raise awareness of them, but also to promote wildlife-friendly habits when we're out visiting the coast, and sort of changing our behaviour slightly to help all of the wildlife and the birds that live on the bay survive. So right now, as Tom was saying again, many of the birds that spend the winter here are either preparing for, or they've already set off on their migration. So that's their journeys back to their northern breeding grounds, which might be just a couple of miles inland in the case of the curlew, for some of the curlews, or it might be as far flung as places like Scandinavia, Siberia, or even Arctic Canada. Some of them are going to. But they've all spent the winter basically feeding up and preparing for their epic journeys across the world to get back to their breeding sites. And they're not only preparing to make sure that they're fit and healthy enough to survive the journey, but also making sure that they're in tip-top condition for when they get there, so that they're ready to find a mate, lay eggs, protect the nests, and hopefully fledge lots of new chicks to introduce new birds into the populations. So once these winter birds leave, it does sort of feel a little bit like the beaches of Morecambe Bay become empty and devoid of birds, but that's not quite true. So when Morecambe Bay's birds head north, the birds that have been wintering further south in places like Southern Europe or even Western Africa, they are also heading north, but they're coming to Morecambe Bay, and lots of them are coming to Morecambe Bay to nest on our fantastic shingle shorelines to raise their young. And that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So about the breeding shorebirds and seabirds that come and nest on our shingle shores. So I just wanted to give a quick outline of the talk. So first, I'll introduce the species of birds that breed on the shingle shores of Morecambe Bay and the Duddon Estuary, which is always nice because there's lots of pictures and lots of fun facts to share with you that I've collected up over the years. And then I'll talk about why they breed in the places around Morecambe Bay, and why the Morecambe Bay and the Duddon Estuary are ideal places for them to raise their families in. Then I'll go into the sort of less positive bit, which is about why not all is well for these species, what sort of threats they face, and the reasons that their breeding success has been far less than it should be over the past few decades. And finally, just to cheer us all up again, I'll be talking a bit about a new project that Morecambe Bay Partnership is going to be working on for the next 4 years to promote and protect our brilliant beach nesting birds. And there'll be ways for you to get involved and do your bit to make sure that these birds that are nesting and trying to raise these adorable chicks are going to have a little bit of an easier summer in the future on our beaches. So before I dive in, I just wanted to mention migration a little bit. So if you have even just a passing interest in wildlife, or you occasionally look at birds, you'll know that over the course of the year, the types of birds that we see, not just on our shores, but all over different habitats, do tend to change. And a lot of people and a lot of different cultures base the arrival of spring on the sight or the sound of the first returning summer birds. So things like swallows, curlews, or cuckoos are quite famous for being the heralds of spring. And here in Morecambe Bay, I know many local bird watchers eagerly await the return of the ospreys that come back year after year to nest at Foulshore Moss. But for me, I've got to say the most exciting new arrivals that come with the return of spring are the fantastic and incredibly resilient birds that come to raise their chicks directly on the shores of Morecambe Bay. And although some of them are familiar faces in the winter season, albeit a little bit more spruced up in their breeding plumage, ready for summer, some of them are really incredible world travellers that only come here for a few months during the breeding season. So let's see who these shore nesting birds are. So first off, there's a couple of wader species. So I'm sure many of you will recognise this bird as our beloved oystercatcher. For those of you who aren't familiar with the oystercatcher, they're probably one of the most distinctive waders we have in Morecambe Bay, and they're an excellent place to start if you're just getting into your wading bird or coastal bird ID. So they've got this very striking black and white plumage, and they actually, back in the olden days, used to be known as sea pie because of their piebald plumage, which is very distinctive. They've got these long pink legs and this very impressive and striking huge orange beak. In the winter around Morecambe Bay, we get about 44,000 oystercatchers spending the winter on our shores. And in many places, you'll probably see the high tide roost literally turns black with all the oystercatchers that are roosting there. But in the summer, there's a lot fewer, but it's more than likely that you'll still see them and probably also still hear them if you get anywhere near where they're nesting. So as I say, oystercatchers are very charismatic, and we're certainly very big fans of oystercatchers here at Morecambe Bay Partnership. Though the adults are very distinctive, their nests and eggs are very camouflaged. So you can see here, it's just basically a little scrape, a little hollow on the ground, especially on their preferred substrate of pebbles. Oh, they're really camouflaged, and you could easily be stood right next to an oystercatcher nest and not even notice that it's there. And this is what an oystercatcher chick looks like. This one's quite big. But if you get too close to an oystercatcher nest or chick, as I say, the adult birds will have no problem sort of squeaking and squawking at you to try and frighten you away. So the other wader that nests on our shingle shores is the ring plover. So ring plovers are really small, sort of about the size of a starling. And despite having what looks like a very striking plumage, they're actually really camouflaged and very difficult to spot on the shores of Morecambe Bay. I've shown this picture before, and it just looks like an empty beach, but there's probably about 15 ring plovers sat on the beach. You can just about make them out here. So you can see that they camouflage in really, really well with the pebble shores. So like oystercatchers, they nest in sort of simple, shallow scrapes on the shore, especially sort of shingle or fine gravel. Again, their nests are very camouflaged. You can just see the eggs here look exactly like pebbles. And even when the adult bird is sat on the nest, they basically just melt into the background and you can't see them. Though ring plovers are obviously a lot smaller than oystercatchers and probably less intimidating to would-be predators, they are equally determined parents. So if a predator is seen nearby by a ring plover sat on a nest, the adult plover will sort of slowly sneak away from the nest and then begin to make lots and lots of noise to draw the predator away from its eggs and its chicks. Some of them will also occasionally sort of fake a broken wing, so they'll drag the wing along on the ground next to them. And this is to sort of try and trick a predator in thinking it's got an easy meal in the form of an injured bird. And once it's drawn the predator far away enough from its nest, the adult will suddenly take off, fly away, its wings magically healed, and the predator's left feeling more than a little silly for being tricked by a tiny bird. And the chances of that predator finding the nest again are very, very low. So they're very, very crafty and very well adapted. Next, we move on to the terns. So terns are, I think, really fantastic birds. They are quite closely related to gulls, but I think when you see a gull and a tern together, there's really no comparison. So gulls they're quite fine looking. They're mostly white. They've got sort of light grey wings. And they also have a black cap and very sort of sharp angled wings when you see them in flight. Some people call them sea swallows, which is probably in reference to the sort of long tail streamers that they have and their really streamlined appearance. And this helps them to not only dive and feed on marine prey, but also helps them to embark on some really impressive migrations, which I'll get to in a moment. So yeah, terns are truly seabirds, and they adapt to feed on things like sand eels and other small fish that live in the top part of the ocean. And they use techniques like skimming, diving, and dipping to catch their prey. And they're actually really mesmerizing to watch feeding. They have super keen eyesight and sort of like hover over the sea looking for the prey. And with that white plumage they've got, they're basically invisible against the sky to the fish in the water. So once they spot their unsuspecting prey, they'll just swoop down and catch it from the water with amazing accuracy and agility. And then during the breeding season, which is when we see them here, you'll see them carrying their prey back and forth to the nest. And they'll be doing this for one of three reasons, depending on the time of year. So they'll be using that to woo a prospective partner, because who's not impressed by a nice big sand eel? They'll be taking it back to feed the other parent bird that's busy watching over the nest, keeping the eggs warm while they're out feeding. Or they'll be bringing back sand eels to feed their young that have hatched. So there are 5 species of terns in the UK, and of these, 4 can be seen in Morecambe Bay and the Dun Estuary during the summer. And these 4 are little tern, common tern, Arctic tern, and sandwich tern. Now, all of them are white with a black cap, so they can be a little bit difficult to tell apart. So I'll give you a quick overview of how to decipher each tern. So starting with the smallest, let's have just a quick look at the little tern. So this individual here in the background is the adult bird. This is a sort of a young fledgling, just about to leave the nest probably. So the adult little tern has this yellow beak with the black tip, and it's also got this white forehead. The Latin name for little tern actually means tern with a white forehead, and that's just in reference to this little white patch it has here in the middle of its little sort of bandit mask type plumage. And the yellow beak as well also differentiates it from other species. And of course, it's really small. So if you see a bird looking like this next to a much bigger tern, then you can probably say it's a little tern. And they are really little too. So the adults weigh probably not even as much as a tennis ball, but they're very small and mighty. They can live to, I think the oldest was about over 21 years old. And considering they spend the winter in faraway places like the Gambia, which is about 5,000 kilometers away, they'll really rack up the air miles over the course of their lives. So they're very impressive. And the chicks are even smaller. So this tiny little chick here would probably fit quite easily in the palm of your hand. They're absolutely tiny. So the little tern is the UK's second rarest seabird. There's only about 2,000 pairs now coming to breed in the UK, and there's been a huge decline in populations over the last 40 years. So they've declined by more than a quarter. So it really is an endangered species, and it's fantastic that we have them coming here to breed in Morecambe Bay, but they are going to need a lot of help to get back to the former glory. So 2,200 years ago, this would have been quite a common bird to see on our shores. But thanks to habitat loss, pollution, and human disturbance, its faced declines, as have a lot of the shingle nesting birds. Next, we have the Arctic tern and the common tern. I just put them side by side because they do sort of superficially look very, very similar. They've both got this light plumage, black head, red beak, red legs, but there are a few little ways that you can tell them apart. So the Arctic tern is probably the most famous of the terns. They are the world's longest migrants, and they travel almost from pole to pole on their migration, and are capable of returning to the exact same spot even after a round trip of up to 50,000 miles. So it's not bad considering this bird only weighs about as much as a deck of cards. It's really, really impressive that they can go that far. The way to tell if it's an Arctic tern is by looking at the colour of the beak and of its legs. So it's got this sort of blood red beak and really short little legs. Obviously, flying all the way to Antarctica every year and back, you're not going to need your legs very much because you'll be spending most of your time on your wings. So they've got these short little legs, and they've also got very long tail streamers, as you can see here. So the common tern, on the other hand, as I say, very similar. They too have red beaks, although their beaks are sort of brighter, a bit more orange red, and they have this sort of black tip to their beaks. They've got slightly longer legs than the Arctic tern, as you can see here. And again, the legs are slightly brighter than an Arctic tern's. And they also have slightly shorter tail streamers. Common terns are interesting because they're one of the few terns, well, the only tern in the UK that will nest inland, so at places, reservoirs, gravel pits, and along rivers. And they'll also helpfully nest on floating artificial platforms. So you might see in places tern rafts are put out to encourage them to bed down there and nest, and that's a good place for them to nest because it'll keep away all those mammalian predators that are coming to try and eat their eggs. So yeah, as I say, they've got like slightly shorter tail streamers than the really long ones of the Arctic tern. And the final tern that we have around Morecambe Bay is the sandwich tern, which in my opinion are the most impressive terns of Morecambe Bay. They're certainly the biggest, and they also have a fantastic black crest at the back of their heads right at the start of the breeding season, like a little punk hairdo at the back. They have these huge black beaks as well, with just a little touch of yellow at the tip. So that's a good way to tell if it's a sandwich tern. And the best place to see them in Morecambe Bay in the Duddon is at RSPB Hodbarrow, where they year after year get hundreds and hundreds of pairs nesting, and you can enjoy the sort of immersive experience of hearing and seeing them flying overhead, carrying an endless stream of sand eels back and forth over the seawall. They do make a lot of noise, and it's not the nicest noise in the world. It's sort of a scratchy screech, but they're nonetheless very impressive and very beautiful to watch. They also, because they're bigger, they tend to dive a bit deeper, so they can dive up to 1 meter below the surface of the water, hunting prey, so they're able to catch bigger prey when they're coming back to the nest. So this is just the little crest that I was talking about. So about the habitat. So some of these birds that we have breeding, these are the birds that we have breeding in Morecambe Bay and the Duddon estuary, have habitats which make them really favourable toward these bird species, and they're partly why the habitats and the areas are designated as special protection areas, and that's because there's a wealth of shingle, sand and sort of remote, slightly offshore or tidal islands. And we do have some really fantastic shingle beaches here. So for example, places like Havrig, Walney Island and Falney Island all have really natural shingle beaches. And then we also have quite interesting ex-industrial sort of slag tips, such as those at Wharton and Hodbarrow, which also seems to fulfill the requirements of these terns and waders looking for a place to nest, despite being man-made. And the birds that nest here are perfectly adapted to living here. So obviously nesting on the ground can be a bit risky. You're quite vulnerable to predation and also people, accidental crushing of your eggs. But they've evolved a few different ways to deal with this problem. So some species, like a lot of the terns, will nest in big colonies, like you can see here. Or they might also, if there's not so many of them in a population, they might nest in close proximity to other ground nesting birds, such as black-headed gulls. And not only does this provide sort of safety in numbers, so you know, if your nest is one of several hundred or several thousand, then you're less likely to get attacked by a predator. But also by nesting together in like big, noisy and aggressive groups, it means that would-be predators are more intimidated away, and it's less likely to try and bother if they're going to have a few hundred terns coming for them. And if anyone's been anywhere near a tern colony, you definitely know that it's there. They're very, very noisy, and some terns would even attack people or like herons, like huge predators. They seem to have no fear, some of them. And then you've got species like your ring plover, which you can see here, or even the little tern, which tend to prefer having a bit more space for their nest. And what they've done is they've evolved to have just brilliant camouflage. So as you can see here, the bird themselves is often able to blend seamlessly into the landscape. And the eggs, as I mentioned, are or basically invisible. Even when you stood next to them, you can be looking right at them and not even see that there's a nest there. The parent birds are also very vigilant. So I mentioned the ring plover faking an injury in order to draw away a predator. But a lot of the terns are also very aggressive and will happily chase away predators far bigger than themselves, especially Arctic terns, who, as I say, are completely fearless, even in the face of comparatively huge predators like a great black-backed gull or a heron. They'll happily band together and chase them away and give them a good telling off. And even the chicks have their own adaptations as well. So this is a very cute slide. The chicks of shingle nesting birds, they often have this sort of speckled grey or brown plumage, which helps them blend in with their environment. You know, this little tern here could just be a little pebble on the beach. Doesn't even look like a bird at all. And the other thing that the chicks can do is that after they hatch, they're quite quickly really able to run around, and they're highly precocial. So they're able to leave the nest and hide for themselves or respond to the parents telling them to hide, and they'll go and sort of squirm away underneath, you know, vegetation or bits of wood or rocks, or even just lie flat on the ground and pretend to be a rock. So these birds are really, really well adapted. They're very well camouflaged. They're very sort of brave and smart, and they have, you know, fresh food coming in with every new tide. So why is it that they're not doing so well around Morecambe Bay and the Duddon estuary? Well, like many animals, wild animals, the natural habitat of these species, which is the shingle shorelines, are being degraded in more than one different ways. So what that means is that though they are surviving, their breeding success in many areas is coming out as zero. So they're not managing to get any chicks away. And the first of these factors affecting the bird's habitat is climate change. So habitat can be sort of forcibly removed over the winter by the huge, tremendous storms that we've been getting in recent years. The beaches completely washed away, which you can see happening alarmingly quickly at South Walney Nature Reserve. You also get a lot more summer storms as well with the changing climate, and also floods, which can wash nests away before chicks even have the chance to hatch and escape for themselves. And then you also get the hotter summers, which mean that eggs can get too hot and cook, or the chicks can die of heat exhaustion. The chicks aren't able to drink until they fledge, so they rely on the parents bringing back enough food in order to get enough liquid to stay hydrated. But then on the other end of the scale, you know, the sudden downpours and wet summers that we can have also means that nests again can flood, or the chicks can get wet before the waterproof feathers grow in. And if they get too cold, then they won't be able to survive and they'll die. So all these climate related factors make suitable and safe breeding habitat for these birds, just makes them really few and far between. There's less and less places where it's suitable for these birds to nest. And then the other problem that are affecting these shore breeding birds' abilities to survive is disturbance. So our coast is getting busier and busier every year. And I'm sure many of us will have noticed in the year we've just had that more and more people are going out more and seeking out more and more areas for recreation away from the crowds. However, these remote areas that we're seeking out to enjoy, there's already birds there, and they're desperately trying to raise their young. And when we go to these places, we often can't see the nests. We don't know the birds are there. And we could easily accidentally step on a nest, frighten away the adult birds so they don't come back. Or, you know, domestic animals, so dogs or even cats, can very quickly catch and eat eggs, chicks, or even the adult birds. And it would happen so quickly that the owner would have no idea it would even happen. And I don't want to sound like we're going after dogs a lot with disturbance, because they're not the only problem, but dogs do cause a disproportionate amount of disturbance. You know, they're closely related to wolves, and wolves are natural predators of these birds. So the reaction of the birds when they see a dog is much stronger than it is when they see something, for example, a person or a child. And the disturbance that dogs cause is also exacerbated by the fact that many popular beaches are being sort of closed to dogs during the summertime. So they're becoming dog-free beaches, which means that dog owners are taking their dogs also to these more remote places where the birds are desperately trying to get their chicks away, and which these, quite rare birds are depending on for having a successful breeding season. And it's been shown that the reduction in ringed plover, so ringed plovers are now a red listed species, and they've gone down by about 37% between 1984 and 2007. And I can only assume it's carried on a similar trend since then. And it's been partly attributed to nest disturbances on some of the beaches that they depend on to breed and raise their young. And as I was writing this talk, not to labour the point too much, but I was just thinking about how it must feel to be a bird trying to breed on your shingle shore and all the challenges you face. So, just put yourself in the shoes of something like a ringed plover or a tern, and it's like you've travelled all this way, you've come all the way back from the equator or somewhere else, and you get back and you get to your shore, and you're exhausted, but you've got to find a mate, you've got to impress your partner. And then you've got to lay your eggs, and then you find somewhere safe to settle. But next day, dog comes along, chases you away. So you've got to find somewhere else. This time you manage to lay your eggs. So you're back and forth, bringing food back to your partner. But it's a really hot spring. So you have to make more and more trips to stay hydrated. And at night, you've got cats and other predators prowling around. So you've got to stay very still, but stay very vigilant and make sure that there's no predators around. But then suddenly out of nowhere, you get a huge summer storm that you're not prepared for, and your nest gets flooded by the sea. So you have to start again and again and again. And even though these birds are capable of having more than one brood, so they can have, ringed plovers can have up to 4 broods, the more that they get disturbed and the more that their attempts fail, the less likely they're going to be successful for their next attempt. So it's basically just an onslaught. Like, it's amazing that any of them do manage to get any chicks away. And then by the time they get to the end of the breeding season, they're absolutely exhausted. They've managed, hopefully, to get 1 or 2 chicks away. And then they've got to head all the way back down south, down to Antarctica or West Africa to spend the winter. So it's just non-stop for them. So it's no wonder really that the ability to get chicks away at the end of the breeding season is hampered. And what will these birds do if they can't get chicks away, if they're not at a suitable site? Well, sometimes they'll abandon the breeding site and find somewhere more remote, like offshore islands. But I mean, in Morecambe Bay and the Dun Estuary, the offshore islands are all quite easy to access. And as I say, people are more and more interested in going to places like Peel Island and Chapel Island, and these places are getting more and more disturbance sort of in the peak of summer and at the point where these birds really need just a little bit of extra quiet time to raise the chicks. So the birds may abandon the bay altogether. Some species like oystercatchers are being seen to move inland to more urban settings, and are basically doing what herring gulls and lesser black-backed gulls have done in the past, which is nesting on places like rooftops or car parks. I know it seems like a good adaptation. It's like, why don't all the birds do that? It's only really possible for species like gulls and oystercatchers because the parents go and get food for the young. So other species, the young feed themselves. And then things like terns, they're very, very fussy about where they nest, and they wouldn't want to nest on a roof. And it's also not clear if moving to an urban setting is a good move for an oystercatcher. So although, yes, if you're up on a rooftop, you're very safe from predators like foxes or dogs or cats. But if you're stuck up on a roof, it's very easy for a chick to accidentally fall off the top and then not be able to get back up, or get stuck in a gutter, or even get picked off by an avian predator with nowhere to hide on the bareness of a rooftop. So for most of the species, the shingle shore is really the only place that they want to be. And as I say, safe habitat of this kind is becoming just harder and harder for them to come by. And this isn't just in Morecambe Bay, it's all over the UK. So hopefully you start to see why I decided to call this talk Life on the Edge. It's not only that the birds, you know, are trying to eke out an existence right on the edge, the boundary line, if you like, between the land and sea, but they're also sort of clinging onto the edge of existence at the moment. And that's why it's really important that we all sort of act now and do our bit to save our precious and really wonderful shore nesting species from a future where they just have nowhere left to go and we don't see them anymore. But the good news is that there's lots of people who are working really hard to protect our species that are living on the edge. So this year, Morecambe Bay Partnership will be working with the RSPB on a countrywide project to protect our shore nesting birds. So the project Life on the Edge is protecting the places where shore nesting birds nest. It's creating new habitat for them to nest. So for example, at RSPB Hodbarrow, they've increased the area of the island where the sandwich tern nest. And what Morecambe Bay Partnership's part in this project is basically leading the way and finding new ways to raise the profile of these birds, who everyone shares the coast with, and try and get people to be a bit more aware of them, and why it's important that we let them breed in peace and quiet. Basically just trying to make sure that they can nest and fledge with minimal disturbance from humans. So what we'll be doing is we'll be conducting surveys, first of all, to find out where these birds are attempting to breed in Morecambe Bay. We'll be working with local communities to set aside areas where the birds can nest undisturbed by human activity. And we'll also be increasing people's awareness of the precarious positions that these really rare and special birds are in through work with schools. We'll be doing public events, we'll be working with community groups, and lots more as the project progresses. And we will be looking for volunteers to get involved with this work very soon. So if you're interested in getting involved or finding out more, I'll pop my email is on the last slide and I'll pop it in the chat as well. So do feel free to drop me an email and find out what opportunities we have and see if there's anything that you'd like to get involved in. However, the most important thing that everyone can do to help these birds is to basically just give them the space that they need to breed safely. So the most important thing of all is when you're visiting the coast, do look out for signs like this that are there to alert you to the presence of nesting shorebirds, and do take heed of them, especially the ones asking you to keep on the path or keep your dog on a lead. So, you know, even if your dog would never catch a bird, or you know you would never purposefully step on a nest, it's the sort of the disturbing the adult bird from leaving the nest can be equally dangerous. You know, if the adult leaves the nest, the eggs or chicks are extremely vulnerable to other predators. They can get stepped on, or even if they're disturbed off the nest on a hot or rainy day, the eggs are, you know, quite vulnerable to failing due to exposure. So they might get too hot or they might get too cold. And if you want to do something extra, then tell all your friends about why they also need to observe signs and look for signs that nesting birds are around, and make sure that we all follow the advice and let them have a peaceful and successful breeding season. We're very lucky that we have lots of fantastic nature reserves and special places where we can go and experience nature. But it's so important that when we do go to these places where these birds are really struggling to survive, we also do our bit to make sure that we leave these wild places in as good or even better condition than when we found them. So almost at the end, I'll just finish up by saying that there is definitely hope for these species yet. And I think this project could make a real difference. If anyone's interested to see any of the species that I've been talking about this evening, I would really strongly recommend a visit to RSPB Hodbarrow over in Nilham, sometimes between May and July, to see the breeding birds there, as long as restrictions allow. So Hogborough is quite unique because it's sort of built around a flooded iron mine. And there's a man-made island on this man-made lake, which is basically a haven for breeding shingle nesting birds. And that's only possible because that site is completely accessible. So it's surrounded by a deep channel filled with water. And then, you know, for belt and braces, it's also got a fence around to stop foxes or other predators swimming across. And because this small area of the site has been put aside solely for shingle nesting birds, the birds have recognised the safety of this small area, and they return year after year in their hundreds. And I just think it would be fantastic if we could, through this project, save a couple more pockets of habitat elsewhere in Morecambe Bay and the Duddon Estuary, just for our shore nesting birds to come back and breed. I think it's definitely possible that we can bring these wonderful breeding birds back from the edge. So thank you so much for giving up your Tuesday evening once again to listen to me talk about the birds of the bay. If you'd like to hear about volunteering opportunities for the Life on the Edge project, do drop me an email. My email address is there and I'll pop it in the chat as well. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you'd like to hear more about what we're up to, you can follow Birds of the Bay on Twitter. We're on the other social medias as well. Just search for Morecambe Bay Partnership, or you can just head to our website and get in touch using the contact form. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. Really, really good. And we've got a few questions for you. So I'm going to start at the bottom actually, because I think the last question here is probably the most relevant to what you ended up talking about ways that people can be involved, and also about the sort of the recreational disturbance. This is I'm not quite sure whether Jackson is the first name, but anyway, from a messenger from the Humber estuary, just says that a lot of these issues with disturbance are replicated on the Humber estuary. Getting the message across to people who are taking part in recreational activities, though, is really difficult. So out of curiosity, other than dog walkers, what are the main forms of disturbance in Morecambe Bay?
It's everything. It's, you know, people walking along the beach, cycling on the beach, kite flying, anything that to a bird looks like a threat. So, you know, people are quite disturbing to them, you know, probably because we're just a big living thing heading towards them. So anyone walking on a beach where they shouldn't be. But I mean, the thing is that they can get habituated to disturbance. So if there's a path going through where they're nesting and they're not expecting people to leave the path, then they won't be disturbed. But the second you step off the path, then that's going to cause a lot of stress and cause them to abandon the nests. And it'll also sort of harm the health of the adult bird as well. So when we feel stressed, even there's a release of this chemical called cortisol, and that sort of triggers the fight or flight response. But they think that cortisol also has a really negative effect on sort of the bird's health as well, and makes it more susceptible to disease. So yeah, anyone, to answer the question, anyone using the beach can cause disturbance, but the best thing you can do is just every time you go to the coast, look for signs that say the shorebirds nest in here. And like 9 times out of 10, it's a really small area that they're using to nest in, and it's only a few months of the year. So when you go back later, obviously the terns will be back down at the equator, and other things won't be there, and you'll be free to use the beach.
So it's quite a positive message, actually, isn't it? That actually by sticking to paths and keeping dogs on leads and things, actually, it's not about stopping visiting these places. It's just about doing.
No, exactly. I mean, yeah, there's so much space for all of us, and it's just, you know, in these places that are nature reserves or that are set aside for nature, we just need to make sure that we're behaving in a way that means we're not hampering that nature's ability to survive.
Yeah. And then the same person has a follow-up question. So do we use recording forms for members of the public to fill in regarding instances of disturbance? So is that one of the things that people can do to help us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we don't have forms to fill out, but I mean, if you want to get in touch and say you've seen a certain sort of disturbance, then that's really helpful. Because what we can do as well, so for example, someone reported that there was some hovercrafts going to places where they shouldn't be. And then we managed to get in touch with the hovercraft people and had a really positive discussion with them and explained why they should be avoiding certain areas at certain times of the year. And they were really positive and are really keen to help us out by avoiding those areas. So if we know what the causes of disturbance are and we know the right people to talk to, then we can be even more direct and active with our conversations and who we can catch, basically.
So it's a good, and you've obviously got your email address that you've put up as well, so people can contact you directly. There's a question here. So you mentioned hovercrafts. I want to hear about drones. Obviously, there's a lot of drones have become increasingly popular, and a lot of them are now flying all over our beaches and shorelines as well. Are they an issue for the birds?
Yeah. So the thing about drones is that they make a really weird noise, which puts the birds on edge. So that releases that stress hormone that I was talking about. But also the way that they hover, it looks just like a bird of prey. So obviously, a bird that's on its nest, it doesn't want to be around the bird of prey, and it's either going to fly off to try and hide where its nest is, or to save itself. So they can cause real problems, especially if they're flying super low. I think you do need permission to fly a drone over a SSI area, and pretty much all of the Morecambe Bay and Duddon Estuary coast is SSI. So anyone flying a drone needs to have permission from Natural England.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good point. Another one, which you talked about hod barrow there, and actually it's sort of fenced off. Is there any aspect of the project which is involved in actually fencing off areas temporarily where birds are nesting?
Yeah, so there are a few places where we think it would really benefit putting some nests in. We might be doing this year, or we might be waiting until next year. But what we want to do is make sure that the fences going in aren't going to upset anyone. We want people to understand why the fences are there, what we're trying to protect, and understand the point that we're not trying to stop people from going wherever they like. We just want to save little pockets of nature reserves just for these birds to nest in undisturbed. And what part of this project we'll be doing is sort of surveying members of the public and people who regularly use the site and seeing how much of the area that they use they would be willing to give up in order to help the birds survive. So we want it to be a very sort of community focused and positive thing. Just so, we don't put a fence up that everyone hates and then immediately cut down, and then it just ends up being a total waste of time.
No, it's really good point. So we've got a comment here about jet skis on the Loon being a problem. So this kind of is never ending, isn't it, really? The list.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always going to be people who don't know the rules, don't care about the rules, and aren't going to be part of the solution. But I think a big problem is that people don't realise that the effect that they have on the wildlife here. I mean, I was saying to a friend today, like, a lot of people see signs and the signs might look a bit tatty and a bit old, and it says nesting shorebirds, and you look down the beach and you're like, I can't see anything nesting there, so you just carry on. And people don't realise that these birds are, there might be 20 of them there that you just can't see because it's so camouflaged. So it's just sort of backing up the infrastructure that's already there with a bit more human interaction. And that's what we'll be looking for volunteers to do as well. So to interact with people on a face-to-face basis and explain what it is that we're trying to protect.
Yeah, that's really good. And actually, that was one of the next questions, was from someone who would love to volunteer, who's been inspired by your talk. So that's Nicola.
Excellent.
So yeah, Nicola, we hope you'll get in touch with Nicola. Amy afterwards.
Welcome on board.
Good. Lots of people thanking you for the talk. You've mentioned hod barrow quite a few times. And question here around, are there still a lot of motorboats on the lake at hod barrow?
Yeah, there are. So it's a marina, I think, and they do like jet skiing there on the lake. But so there's like a line from like the edge of the seawall where the jet skis and the motorboats aren't allowed to go past. And I spent summer before last wardening the site at Hodbarrow, and you don't see many people going past the boundary. People tend to be quite respectful, and I think because you've got the island with the terns on it just there, if you do go past and you see them all go up in a huge noisy flurry, you probably realise you've done something wrong and you scoot back over the other side. But no, it's not. There was very, very few disturbances the summer I spent there.
Yeah. So the ethos is very much around letting people know about, who probably aren't aware of the birds and that their activities are having an impact. And it sounds as if your kind of ethos, or sort of voluntary codes of conduct, and going for the very positive messaging, it does have an effect.
I think so. I think we talk a lot about dog walkers being the problem, but I think a lot of people who have dogs and are dog lovers are animal lovers, and would hate the thought of themselves hurting wildlife. And I think people just aren't aware, and we just need to make people aware. And it's much more positive to have voluntary codes of conduct and get people to have that sense of pride of their local area, and then they're more likely to protect it, not just through the life of this project, which is only 4 years, but also for their whole lives, and teach future generations as well.
You ready for some slightly more technical questions?
Oh no.
So I think we've got some other people who are here tonight who might be able to chip in as well with answers to some of them. So first one here is people have noticed that we have a lot more oystercatchers in the winter than we do in the summer. So why do some of them choose to migrate and others don't, is the question? Or are they totally different populations of birds?
So some of them will be from totally different populations. So I think we get quite a lot of oystercatchers coming down from Scandinavia, and anyone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But we get lots coming down from places like Scandinavia, and also we'll get some coming down from closer places like Scotland. And they want to be in Morecambe Bay because it's a bit warmer for them over the winter months. It's not too far for them to come, and there's also loads and loads of food for them out in the sands of Morecambe Bay. So it's just a good place to be for them. But during the summer, as I've been saying, it's not perfect for loads of birds to nest there. So they go up to places which are a bit more remote and they don't have as much disturbance. And it's just a little bit safer. But they do tend to, I know oystercatchers, I've recently learned that they'll follow the father bird. So the mum and they'll do the same journeys that the father birds do. Call it dad effect. Someone else might know more about it, but different populations do act differently, and some oystercatchers will only go a few miles away for the winter for the breeding season, and some of them will travel hundreds of thousands of miles, and it's just partly what is in their blood, what their ancestors do, and partly just because I don't know, maybe just because it makes sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? It sounds like there's more research needed there.
More research by me, definitely, but
no, I didn't mean by you. I just meant generally, just to understand the kind of animal behavior is just endlessly fascinating, isn't it?
It is, and I think migration is just one of those things where it's for a long time people have been looking for a definitive answer of how did they do it, why did they do it, but I think it's just a combination of lots of different reasons and lots of different mechanisms.
But that fact that it's a lot of it's learned behavior, and they're copying what the dad birds do. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
So a specific comment here around the salt marshes at Boltonless Sands. So asking which birds are likely to be nesting there, and the person's concerned because they've seen a huge increase in human and canine visitors, I guess, particularly during lockdown. A lot of you mentioned it in your talk, I think a lot of quite remote areas have become really busy, haven't they, as people are trying to get away from people or find, kind of rediscovering their local area.
Definitely. But salt marsh, you get things like red shank trying to nest there. You might get a few ring plovers and oystercatchers. But Boltonless Sands is a really tough one, and it is somewhere where I would like to do more work, but it's very difficult to sort of catch everyone because it's got what we like to call diffuse access. So there's lots of points where people can get on and go onto the salt marsh, and there's no way that you could catch everyone unless you had a big barrier of volunteers linking arms, stopping everyone from going across. So yeah, it's definitely a place that does need some more work. But what we're going to try and do to reduce disturbance in those areas where we can't necessarily catch everyone going on is just have more work with like local councils and local sort of newspapers, and try and get the message about disturbing birds more out in the general media, so that people start to have this sort of background bit of information creeping in that, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing that, maybe we need to think before we go out and upset all these red shanks.
Yeah, and more, I mean, and as you say, sort of more people who want to offer to be ambassadors for the scheme as well, and sort of eyes and ears and mouths out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the best thing you can do is just tell everyone you know about it. That's the word of mouth is the most valuable thing of all, I think.
So another one, you mentioned ringed plovers quite a lot. Do you know how many we have across Morecambe Bay and the Duddon?
I don't off the top of my head. No. I think there's about, actually someone did tell me today, I think there's not very many. There's probably a few hundred that are coming back to breed in the Morecambe Bay and Duddon estuary areas. So not very many at all. And I mean, the ones that are there are even hard to find as well. So
yeah. I wondered if that was one that Richard Defew might help us with, as he's one of the bird ringers locally and does a lot of work on bird stats. I don't know if Richard can hear me. He wants to help us with an answer to that one. Chip in if you can. No idea.
Okay. I think you've answered it. It's just nice to have an order of magnitude, isn't it? But hundreds, basically, rather than thousands, is what we're talking about. Good. There's so many questions. I'm struggling to keep up with them all. So I've totally lost the order in which people are asking them. This is a really good question, though. So how? And actually, this might be one for Susanna, actually, rather than you, Amy. How do you see the Morecambe Bay Partnership working with the Eden Project North going forwards? And are we involved at all in developing the Morecambe Bay curriculum education?
Do you want me to answer, Tom?
Yeah, I think you're probably quite well placed.
Yeah, so we have been in conversation with the Eden Project North people for a long time, and we have regular catch-ups with them. And we're continuing to have conversations with them. And obviously, it's a positive relationship and everybody wants to work together. With regards to the Morecambe Bay curriculum, that has up to now been very much about further education and schools working together. But what we're finding again and again is almost every week we get a question along the lines of, can we tell them everything we know about? And so obviously it's a little bit of a challenge for us to manage in terms of capacity, how we respond to that. But we're having ongoing and further discussions with them. And Michelle's picking up some more conversations with them in the next few days about this. So to date, they have been looking at such things as one of the things that's come up very, very often in the development of the curriculum is looking at some of the stories of the Bay. And of course, through our previous work, we have done an awful lot of collecting and recording stories such as oral histories. And anybody who's interested can go to our Recording Morecambe Bay website. If you just put Recording Morecambe Bay into Google, you'll find that there's a whole wealth of stories that we've collected from the fishing community and from all sorts of people around the history of Morecambe Bay, tales that people have told us about Morecambe Bay. And so in terms of our relationship with Eden, it's a very positive one, and there is much more to be developed. And I think everybody with respect to Eden is looking very eagerly at tomorrow's budget and seeing whether there is further funding going to be available to the Eden project to bring it to Morecambe. And if not in this budget, maybe in a future one.
Good, thank you. Yeah, there are loads of questions. So the order now is getting quite random as I try and keep up. So yeah, just building on the Bolton Le Sands comment, really. You're talking about salt marsh nesting, and this basically saying they'd love to hear a little bit more in another talk about the salt marshes and the breeding birds of the salt marshes and the ecology of those. I am totally fascinated by the salt marsh as well. The way that it, the way it comes and goes.
As like as a habitat in general. You could talk for hours on salt marsh. There's all the different, sort of spectra of life that live there.
Yeah. I'm kind of vaguely aware as well that certainly the bit of the shoreline where I live, you have kind of tidal mud right the way hard up to the shoreline. We don't really get the shingle beaches quite as much. Whereas actually, as soon as the salt marsh starts accreting again, it's lifting the land up above the tide, and it does create nesting opportunities, doesn't it? So good, thank you. The comment here, RSPB Snettisham has a great way of positive messaging. On the footpaths, they have happy dog zones and happy wildlife zones.
Oh, that's nice. Which
is a nice way of avoiding negative language. I agree. So, right, I'll just have a final scan. I think that's probably it. I mean, there's a general question here, I think, about volunteering opportunities. So you've clearly inspired lots of people to want to volunteer. I think a couple of people are maybe still thinking about it. So you've mentioned kind of the ambassador scheme, the face-to-face scheme, to actually talking to members of the public. You've talked a little bit about wanting people to identify areas where birds are nesting and bringing them to your attention so that you can help to look after them. Are there any other specific volunteer roles that you're looking for help with?
So there's the two that you mentioned, but also like some help as well, surveying people who use the site. So if anyone's good at getting people to fill out surveys, that's a valuable skill. But really anything you feel that you could bring to the table. I know a lot of people struggle to volunteer because they don't have access to a car or they can't get around. So if you would like to volunteer and you have any ideas of how you can use your own skills or do something you enjoy in order to help out the project, then do just get in touch. And because it's going to be a huge project and I'm not going to be able to do very much on my own, so the more help and the more people who want to get involved, the better. We can do things like, if you're good at write articles that we can then send off as press releases, maybe help with social media, or if anyone's got any fantastic photography skills they'd like to volunteer for us, that would be fantastic as well. So really anything that you feel would be a help, and then we can see how we can fit it into the project.
Certainly. I mean, and it really is one that actually kind of, people socially distancing on their own, or working from home, sharing images of the birds and getting messages out on social media. It's something that really can carry on through lockdowns.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're part of a group, a community group, and you want to give a talk on something, then we'd be very happy to support you. Sharing the messages with us.
Now, I know your profile describes you as a marine biologist, so this is a good question for a marine biologist, I think. So, saying we're seeing more and more marine mammals returning to parts of the bay, and historically we haven't really seen that, at least in sort of living memory. Is this an indication of a change in water quality in the bay, and is there any link between the mammals returning and the food available, I guess, for the birds, or changes in water quality that might be impacting the birds potentially in a positive way?
Yeah, it could be. Like obviously better water quality means that there's more life in the water, and that might mean that there's less there's more things growing on the seafloor, which is then feeding like the fish, and then that's feeding the bigger things like the whales and dolphins. So Morecambe Bay is a really great place for wildlife because it's all that mud and sand that we've got when the tide goes out. It's just full of life, and when the tide's in, obviously all the marine creatures can make use of that as well. So as the water quality increases, then the small creatures that are really affected by changes in water quality, they increase, and then that brings in your porpoise and your whales and your dolphins. Maybe not whales, but we can dream.
And our porpoise and dolphin sightings on the increased seals in Morecambe Bay, and the kind of, I guess, off Walney and things.
Yeah, so seals are definitely on the increase, grey seals. It's tough to say with things like whales and dolphins, because the only way we know that they've been around is if people see them, and that depends entirely on like whether people are looking for them. Porpoise are really hard to spot even when you're just out with the only purpose of finding a porpoise. So it's hard to say whether they're increasing, but there are some people that think, especially for the larger sort of whales, the populations are only just now recovering from the terrible persecution they got back when there was lots of whale hunting going on. So we might be seeing that these species bouncing back a little bit.
Yeah, and that, I mean, there are cetacean spotting citizen science projects, aren't there, that people can
Yeah,
get involved
definitely, and it's so organisations like Sea-Watch and Marine Life and Orca, they're all going out and getting people to do surveys. But again, it's volunteer led, so it's the data they can collect is only as good as the areas that they are collecting the data from and the amount of people they have looking.
Yeah. So if you're going out looking for birds and you see porpoises and seals, let others know.
Yeah.
Because it all helps.
The Wildlife Trust would probably be a good Living Seas Northwest to be a good place to register sightings. I'd be very jealous.
Yeah. I don't know whether she's someone we might be able to persuade to come on a talk, actually, but Dr. Emily Baxter, who's the Living Seas for the Wildlife Trust in the Northwest, she is absolutely brilliant. We're incredibly lucky to have her. So she could certainly, she would not only welcome sightings, but also, I think we could persuade her, Susanna, to come and do a sea talk. And she's been very involved as well in the setting up of the marine conservation zones that we've seen in the Irish Sea as well. So she's turning the sightings into evidence, and the evidence into marine protection areas. So it is a great bit of work that's going on. They're still coming in, Amy. So we'll keep going till 8:30 probably, if we can, if we still getting questions. So avian flu's been in the news in Russia, hasn't it? There was, I can't even remember how long ago. Was it 10, 15 years ago? It was linked to a lot of wild bird deaths. I mean, particularly, obviously, waterfowl. Is it still a problem? And is it anything that you've come across in your work?
Yeah, so we actually had a recent outbreak here in Ulverston of bird flu, which took out some of the swans that live on the canal. So there was, a sort of slight increase, but it seems to have calmed down a bit. I think there's a lot of knot as well that washed up further down the coast that we thought might be victims of bird flu. But yeah, I mean, again, as I was saying, like this, they think that this stress hormone that gets released when birds get disturbed causes them to be less resilient to diseases like bird flu. So, it's not always the first thing you think of when you accidentally disturb a bird, but it does really reduce their chances of being able to, recover from diseases, because diseases are always, exist and are around, but it's just whether they can deal with it and whether they can fight to live another day, as it was.
Yeah. So we had a couple of people here are recommending a book for you, Amy, called Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey, which is a novel all about Arctic terns.
That sounds good. I've never heard of that one. I'll have to add it to our list.
It sounds like it's coming recommended anyway, so you'll have to get yourself.
I'll have to treat myself.
Yeah. Thanks, Max. I keep coming down. It is nice. I do, it's a good. There's just been such an explosion, hasn't there, of wonderful nature writing in recent years. I think it is one of the joys of being alive in this country. Actually, I think the British are particularly good at nature writing. It's been so lovely. There's been such a resurgence of it. Okay, so we've got some sightings as well here. So humpback whale, don't get too excited, near the Farne Islands yesterday.
Did see that.
Yeah, but a harbour porpoise off Morecambe a couple of weeks ago.
Very nice.
So that is a really nice one. Yeah.
They are lovely harbour porpoises.
Yeah. We've got an answer about ringed plovers. So a study in 1973 found 54 pairs of ringed plovers on shingle shores. By 1980, there were only 25. So it could be even fewer than that.
Yeah.
Saying there was 173 pairs around Morecambe Bay. So yeah, it's that's including other habitats. So things like if you include salt marsh, airfields, power stations, and things, it's a higher figure. But yeah, it is low.
Tom, there was a question before about eider duck.
Oh yeah, I missed. I did
numbers of eiders, and I'm not sure if we have a techie bird ringer or bird counter who actually knows the answer. But eiders are quite interesting because they nest on Walney, South Walney, and they nest on Chapel Island. But it is the most southerly site that eiders nest because they're an Arctic bird. They're a very, very large duck. They're the big black and white. The males are black and white, the females are brown. They're a very, very large duck. They're sort of the largest duck you can have before you get to a goose, if you like. Yeah. And you do see them in increasing numbers. You can see them from Morecambe, you can see them all around the bay. And when they have their young, they form creches. And on the train, if you take the train across to Barrow, as you cross the Leven estuary, you can't guarantee it, but you can quite frequently see a creche of eiders, a mother or two or three mothers with lots of other people's kids. So they form creches, which are wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see. But the reason that I butted in with that question is that I don't have a technical answer. I don't have the bird counters answer. But through the work we've done with the wildfowling community, I was told by one of our oldest wildfowlers that his Uncle John got some eider duck eggs and put them under a goose on Barrow. And that was the start of eiders on Walney. Now, whether that is true or not, and when it happened, I'm not absolutely certain, but it was reported to me as happening in the 60s. So I would love for that tall tale to be confirmed. But the other story I have about eiders is that I mentioned they nest on South Walney and also on Chapel Island. Now, Chapel Island is the tidal island in the Leven estuary. So it's the one you can see south of Ulverston or Canal Foot or from the Hode. And Jack Manning, who was a great friend of the partnership, who sadly is now dead, but he was one of the veteran fishermen of the bay. Jack told me that eiders took over Chapel Island from shelduck. And as far as he was concerned, Chapel Island was used for shelduck nesting until about the 80s, when he saw the eiders pushing the shelduck out. Now, shelduck nest in burrows like a rabbit burrow, and eiders nest on the ground. You could imagine a large bird like an eider could be quite intimidating, but the shelduck is the next largest bird. So quite what the truth of all these stories is, I don't know, but there's two fascinating tales that I have been told about the eiders. And I certainly believe that their numbers are increasing around the bay. That's just an observation that I've made, and there may be people like Jean who can tell us the facts.
Thank you. Yeah, I've heard that anecdotally as well, that people are seeing them more, and actually up the Cumbrian west coast further up as well. So no, they're amazing birds, and the sound is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, do an eider duck sound for us, Tom.
I hear it's kind of ooh, ooh. It's like Frankie Howard, isn't it? So you got one about birds of prey as well. So you mentioned ospreys, which I guess is probably the one that really springs to mind when we think of birds of prey on Morecambe Bay. I mean, I've certainly seen them cruising spectacularly off Arnside and around the shore at Silverdale. Are there any other birds of prey to keep an eye out?
Yeah, so in terms of the big ones, so you've got ospreys, which is sort of just making their way back from Africa at the moment. Red kites and buzzards are the other big ones that you can see. So red kites, you just look for that sort of notch in the tail to see That's like the diagnostic feature of red kites. And then sort of smaller birds of prey, you'll get things like peregrines, merlins, kestrels. Yeah, there's a few around. Yeah, and like the birds of prey will also, you know, feed on the birds that are trying to nest on the shores. So yeah, but I mean, you know, the effect they have on the populations is minimal, and of course they've always been there, as long as the other birds have been there. But other birds that prey on are sort of like eggs and chicks will be things like large gull species, and even things like a black-headed gull might take the odd egg. So I know in some places they do put measures in to try and reduce the amount of disturbance coming from gull predation, but the thing is as well is that gulls are also a really rapidly declining species, like even the herring gull that I know a lot of people aren't huge fans of, but their populations are absolutely plummeting. And if anyone has been to South Walney, there used to be, you know, in the past 5 years, there used to be, I don't know, 20 times the amount of gulls nesting on the reserve than there are today. Their population's really crashed. So it's definitely not worth demonizing certain birds for preying on other birds.
Yeah. So they're not the main factor, are they, behind it?
No. I mean, a healthy population should be able to see off a hungry gull, but no, we are lucky. We do have quite a lot of sort of birds of prey around, and birds of prey seem to be doing quite well. Oh, and of course there's owls as well. So there's barn owls and tawny owls that'll be around.
A lot of that brings us back to the salt marshes again, doesn't it? In a way, it's only from an owl point of view. Quite a few people, you're going to have to do a salt marsh talk, Amy, I'm afraid.
No.
People are requesting it. Good. Yeah, thank you. So I think that's the end of the questions. Unless Suzanne, you've picked up any other ones I've missed. I think it's the most number of questions. So.
A bird that I associate with the salt marshes from a bird of prey point of view is the short-eared owl, which is sometimes thought of as the daytime flying owl. If you see a largish owl with longish, thinnish wings flying during daytime, almost certainly a short-eared owl.
Yeah.
And I have seen them quite frequently on salt marshes, hunting on salt marshes, especially in more agricultural areas where there's farmland inshore.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Amy. You can see from the amount of questions, you know, the level of interest and how long everyone stayed as well. So it's been absolutely fantastic. We look forward to hearing from you again.